Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling some interesting and maybe unexpected claims about Islam
Okay,
that you shared with us.
right.
It all stems from an article titled "Shocking Truths About Islam That Most People Don't Know."
Oh, wow.
Now, just from the title, you can
Yeah.
probably tell this piece is aiming to shake things up a little bit.
Yeah, it seems to present itself as kind of unveiling these hidden or suppressed truths,
Right.
claiming to provide a very unique perspective that might challenge your existing understanding of Islam.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's unpack these claims together and see what we can make of them.
Okay.
The first one jumps right into the origins of the Quran,
Hmm.
questioning where the knowledge actually came from.
Okay.
The article argues that the Quran itself says
Right.
it wasn't directly from God.
Interesting.
It's kind of a bold statement right off the bat.
Yeah, that's a fascinating how the article uses specific verses from the Quran to build its case.
Yeah.
For example, it points to Surah Al-Furqan, verse 59.
Okay.
Which talks about the creation of the universe and mentions a being who sits on his throne.
Right.
Now, traditionally, this is understood to be referring to God.
Of course.
But the article highlights how this verse also says that this being admits to not fully understanding God,
Okay.
which it uses to suggest that there's another entity involved.
That's very different than what's commonly understood, right?
Right.
So how does the article explain this other entity?
It draws on verse 55 of the same surah, which warns against worshiping anything other than Allah.
Okay.
The article claims that this is actually the knowledge provider, urging Prophet Muhammad to follow Allah as the true power. It's almost like they're presenting this being as a guide, pointing Prophet Muhammad in the right direction.
Okay, so there's this powerful being
Yeah,
who gives a knowledge but also directs attention to Allah.
right.
Then the article brings in the story of Prophet Muhammad's encounter with Angel Gabriel.
Okay.
You know, the traditional account of Gabriel appearing to Muhammad and revealing the Quran.
Right. The article highlights the fear and coercion described in some accounts of this event,
Okay.
pointing to the imagery of Gabriel appearing in a cave and compelling a terrified Muhammad to receive the revelation.
Wow.
And it then asks, would a truly loving God choose to reveal himself in such a way,
Right.
instilling fear rather than comfort?
It's definitely raising some thought-provoking questions about the nature of divine revelation.
And based on this line of reasoning, the article concludes that the knowledge provider is not God, but a separate being named Kesher Purish, or Kal.
Kesher Purish. Now, that's a term I haven't come across before. Could you shed some light on who this Kesher Purish is?
Sure.
According to the article?
Certainly.
Yeah.
In the article's interpretation, Kesher Purish refers to a powerful being distinct from God who is claimed to be the source of the Quran's knowledge.
Okay.
It's important to remember that this is a very specific interpretation presented by this particular source
Right.
and may differ from other understandings of Islamic theology.
That's helpful context.
Yeah.
So the first claim sets the stage for a pretty different perspective on how the Quran came to be, right?
Exactly. It's suggesting a more complex process with this figure of Kesher Purish acting as an intermediary. Now, the second claim challenges another common understanding of Islam, the concept of rebirth.
Okay.
The article insists that the soul undergoes cycles of life and death, contrasting with the belief held by many Muslims that there is no reincarnation.
That's a pretty big difference in belief.
It is.
How does the article support this idea of rebirth within Islam?
It uses a couple of Quranic verses to make its case.
Okay.
Surah Al-Mulk, verse 2, talks about God creating life and death as a test for humanity.
Okay.
The article links this to the concept of karma, where actions in past lives can influence one's present circumstances. It's essentially saying that these cycles of life and death are part of a larger process of spiritual development.
I see. So each life becomes a sort of lesson or test.
Right.
Building on what came before.
Exactly.
Okay.
And to further support the idea of rebirth, the article points to Surah Al-Anbiya, verse 104, which describes the universe being rolled up like a scroll on the Day of Judgment.
Okay.
Now, traditionally, this is interpreted as referring to the end of the world.
Right.
However, the article interprets this imagery as suggesting that the universe is then recreated,
Okay.
implying a cyclical process that includes rebirth.
Interesting. It's taking those verses and presenting an alternative reading of their meaning.
Yes.
It's like looking at a familiar painting and suddenly noticing details you never saw before.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And the article goes even further, bringing in another religious text to support its argument.
Okay, this is getting really interesting.
Yeah.
Which text are we talking about?
The Bhagavad Gita, a Hindi scripture.
Okay.
The article points out that in the Gita, the being who gives the knowledge known as Kal acknowledges that he himself undergoes multiple births. The article then connects this to the Islamic concept of Qashr Parash,
Okay.
arguing that if Qal, a similar figure in another religion, experiences rebirth, it lends weight to the idea that the soul is reborn in Islam as well.
So it's drawing parallels between different religious traditions to support its claims?
Yeah,
That's a pretty bold move.
it definitely shows how the article is weaving together a very specific narrative.
Okay.
Now, the third claim dives into a potentially sensitive topic,
Okay.
the permissibility of meat consumption in Islam.
That's a topic with a lot of different interpretations and practices, even within Islam itself.
Right.
How does this article approach it?
It directly challenges the idea that eating meat is permissible, even though it's a common practice,
Okay.
particularly during events like Baqar'id.
So it's really going against the grain on this one.
It is.
What's the basis for this challenge?
It leads with a moral argument asking, how can a God who created all creatures also condone their killing? To illustrate this point, the article makes a comparison to a parent whose heart would break if one child harmed another.
Okay.
The implication is that God, as a loving creator, would similarly feel sorrow at the suffering of his creations.
It's a thought-provoking analogy that forces you to confront the ethics of consuming meat,
Right.
especially within the framework of a belief system that emphasizes compassion and mercy.
Exactly. And the article goes on to debunk the idea that praying before slaughter somehow sends an animal's soul to heaven.
Right.
It calls that logic absurd, emphasizing that taking a life, regardless of ritual, is still taking a life.
So it's rejecting those attempts to justify the practice of animal slaughter.
Yes.
Okay.
And to further drive home its point, the article highlights examples of prominent figures in Islam who were known for their compassion towards animals.
Okay.
It mentions Prophet Muhammad, who, according to some accounts, brought a dead cow back to life. And Rabia, a female Islamic mystic known for her piety, who prioritized the well-being of a thirsty dog.
Those stories seem to paint a very different picture of how Muslims can and perhaps should relate to animals.
Precisely. The article uses these examples to contrast the ideal of compassion with the practice of ritual slaughter,
Okay.
suggesting that true piety lies in showing kindness to all of God's creations.
Okay, so we've got three pretty bold claims so far.
Yes.
The source of the Quran's knowledge,
Right.
the concept of rebirth,
Uh-huh.
and the ethics of meat consumption.
And we're just getting started.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff.
It is.
This article certainly doesn't shy away from tackling some pretty big questions.
No, it doesn't.
And the next one delves into a core concept in Islam,
Okay.
the nature of God.
Right.
Specifically, it challenges the idea of a formless God.
Yes, the article argues that, contrary to the belief held by many that God has no form, the Quran actually suggests that God does indeed have a form.
That's a significant departure from more common interpretations.
It is.
How does the article support this claim?
It returns to a verse we discussed earlier.
Okay.
Surah Al-Furqan, verse 59.
Right.
The one that describes the creation of the universe and mentions a being sitting on his throne.
Uh-huh.
The article emphasizes this imagery,
Okay.
drawing a parallel to a king sitting on his throne, suggesting that God has a physical form.
So it's taking a very literal interpretation of that verse.
Exactly. And it doesn't stop there. It brings in Surah Furqan, verse 54,
Okay.
which talks about God creating humans from water and establishing their relationships.
Right.
The article argues that only a being with a physical form could perform such creative actions,
Uh-huh.
shaping and molding humanity.
It's interesting how it's using these verses to paint a very different picture of God than what's often presented.
Right. And to further strengthen its argument, the article points to yet another verse from the same surah,
Okay.
verse 53, where God separates the sweet and salty seas. It highlights God's active role in this separation,
Right.
physically dividing the waters as further evidence of God having a form.
It's really interesting how the article is connecting these different verses to build its case.
It is.
It's like piecing together a puzzle,
Yeah,
but with a very specific outcome in mind.
that's a great analogy. Now for the final claim, the article gets to what it presents as the ultimate truth,
Okay.
the true identity of God.
Okay, this is where things get really interesting.
Absolutely. The article makes a bold statement.
All right.
It claims that regardless of the names used for God, whether it's Allah, Ram, Jesus, or Waheguru,
Okay.
the true God is actually Kabir.
Kabir, that's not a name commonly associated with Islam.
Right.
Can you tell us more about who Kabir is according to the article?
The article presents Kabir as a divine figure who transcends religious boundaries.
Okay.
It uses Surah Al-Furqan, verse 52, to support this claim. This verse talks about seeking guidance from a Bakabar,
Right.
which is often translated as well-informed or one who brings news.
Okay.
The article interprets this Bakabar as Lord Kabir, claiming that the Quran itself is directing people to follow him as the true God.
That's a very specific interpretation of that verse.
It is.
How does the article connect Kabir to other religious traditions?
It mentions that Kabir is also present in other religious texts,
Okay.
suggesting that he's a universal God figure who has revealed himself across different faiths.
Right.
It even claims that Kabir is the one who took Prophet Muhammad to Satlak,
Satlak.
which it describes as a heavenly realm free from suffering.
Satlak, another new term.
Yeah.
What exactly is Satlak according to the article?
It's depicted as a kind of paradise,
Okay.
a realm of pure bliss and spiritual liberation.
Okay.
The article even claims that Prophet Muhammad, after experiencing the wonders of Satlak,
Yeah.
chose to return to Earth,
Mm-hmm.
drawn by the praise and adoration of his followers.
That's quite a story.
It is.
So it's positioning Kabir as a powerful figure
Yes,
who even Prophet Muhammad had a connection with.
exactly. And to further emphasize Kabir's importance, the article points to Surah Al-Furqan, verse 58,
Okay.
where it identifies Kabir as the immortal saint who knows all sins and has the power to forgive them.
So it's presenting Kabir as the ultimate source of forgiveness and salvation.
And then the article goes on to make a very specific claim.
Okay.
It declares that the true God, Kabir, has manifested on earth as Saint Rampalji Maharaj.
Saint Rampalji Maharaj.
Yeah.
That name might be familiar to some listeners.
It might.
Can you tell us a bit more about him?
According to the article, Saint Rampalji Maharaj is a contemporary spiritual leader who is revealing the true teachings of Kabir and transforming lives.
Okay.
It presents him as the embodiment of God on earth.
Wow. So we've gone from questioning the source of the Quran's knowledge to exploring the concept of rebirth,
Right.
to examining the ethics of eating meat, to ultimately being presented with this figure of Saint Rampalji Maharaj as the true manifestation of God.
It's been quite a journey through this article's unique interpretation of Islamic concepts.
Definitely a lot to unpack here.
It's certainly thought-provoking how this article uses specific verses and interpretations to present its perspective.
Yeah.
It really highlights the diversity of thought that can exist
Right.
within any religious tradition.
It definitely makes you realize that there's always more to learn and consider.
Yeah.
Even with something as seemingly well-established as religious doctrine.
Right.
What stands out to you most from all these claims?
Well, the article's consistent thread seems to be emphasizing a specific path to God,
Okay.
ultimately leading to Saint Rampalji Maharaj.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting how it weaves together different elements,
Right.
from the source of the Quran's knowledge to the concept of rebirth,
Mm-hmm.
and even dietary choices,
Yeah.
to create a narrative that supports this particular path.
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's building a case piece by piece,
Right.
leading to a very specific conclusion.
Exactly.
Do you think this approach might be persuasive to some people?
It's certainly possible. For someone who might be questioning traditional understandings
Right.
or seeking a different perspective,
Uh-huh.
this article's approach could be quite appealing.
Okay.
It presents a clear path, a sense of certainty,
Yeah.
in a world that often feels uncertain.
That makes sense. And it seems to connect with a human desire for simple answers and clear direction.
Exactly. But it also raises some important questions.
Right.
How do these interpretations compare with more mainstream Islamic thought?
Yeah.
Are there other ways of understanding these same Quranic verses?
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
It's reminding us that this article presents one particular interpretation.
Right.
And it's important to be aware of other perspectives as well.
Right. And that's why it's so valuable to engage with a variety of sources and interpretations.
Yeah.
It helps us develop a more nuanced and informed understanding.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Now, I'm curious for someone listening to this,
Uh-huh.
how might these claims challenge or expand their understanding of Islam? What questions might this deep dive spark for them?
I think it encourages listeners to go beyond surface-level understanding.
Okay.
It prompts them to ask, how are religious texts interpreted? How do those interpretations shape beliefs and practices?
Right.
And perhaps most importantly,
Yeah.
how can we engage with different viewpoints,
Right.
even those that challenge our own,
Uh-huh.
in a respectful and open-minded way?
Those are excellent questions to ponder, and it really underscores the importance of critical thinking and ongoing exploration
Yes,
when it comes to matters of faith and spirituality.
absolutely. There's always more to learn, more to discover,
Right.
and each new perspective can enrich our understanding,
Yeah.
even if we don't ultimately agree with it.
I think that's a wonderful takeaway from this deep dive.
It is.
As we wrap up,
Okay.
is there a final thought you'd like to leave our listener with? Something to spark their continued exploration.
The article heavily emphasized certain interpretations of specific Quranic verses.
Okay.
I'd encourage the listener to delve into how different schools of thought within Islam approach these same verses.
Hmm.
It's a fascinating way to understand the diversity and richness of Islamic thought.
That's a great suggestion.
Yeah,
It's like opening a door to a whole new world of understanding.
exactly.
And on that note,
Yeah.
we'll leave you to continue your own exploration of this captivating topic. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.